The letter arrived before the woman did. It came in the form of a folded square tucked inside Emmett Crail's door one morning in late autumn. No seal, no name on the outside, just a single line of orc script he could not read scratched across the front. He set it on the edge of his desk and waited, the way a good scrivener learns to wait for the story that belongs to the thing placed before him. She came that same afternoon, just before he would have shuttered his lamp. The door of the shop opened, and the cold came in with her, and the town square behind her went quiet in the particular way it always did, when something unexpected walked its cobblestones. Emmett had heard that quiet before. He did not look up from it. She was tall, nearly a head taller than the doorframe demanded, and she moved, carefully in the small room, as a person does when they have learned that other people's spaces were not built with them in mind. Green-skinned, tusked, with her dark hair pinned back under a traveling hood she had not yet removed. She wore a long coat of oiled wool, a woodsman's coat, and she held in both hands, with the careful tenderness of someone carrying a wound, a folded piece of paper that had been soaked and dried and soaked again until it was the color of old birch bark. "I was told," she said, "that you read letters for people who cannot read them themselves." "I do," Emmett said. He set down his pen. He did not qualify it. She put the letter on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "My father wrote it," she said. "He was sick for a long time. He wrote it in the common tongue because he wanted me to be able to read it, but—" She stopped. "The crossing was hard. The river got into my pack. The water damage had taken most of 3 lines in the middle and blurred perhaps a quarter of the rest. A lesser reader might have handed it back with apologies." Emmett picked it up and tilted it toward the lamp. "Sit down," he said. "This will take a few minutes." She sat in the chair across from his desk, the one he kept for clients, a broad-backed thing he'd had a carpenter widen at the arms when old Torvin the blacksmith had started coming in to dictate his will, and she folded, her hands in her lap, and waited with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that stillness was the only currency strangers accepted. Emmett read the whole letter first without speaking. Then he read it again. The water had taken a name from the middle section, a proper name, by the spacing, and 3 lines at the bottom were mostly gone, but the shape of the thing was intact. A father's voice, careful and formal in the way of someone who wrote rarely and meant every word. He had been a man who chose his sentences the way a builder chooses load-bearing wood. When Emmett read it aloud, he read at the pace the man had written it. No rushing, no summarizing, no smoothing of the places where the old man's hand had paused and pressed harder to make a word clear. He read the legible sections fully and described the gaps honestly. Here there's a name, 3 syllables by the shape of it. The first letter might be a V or a U. And when he came to the last lines, where the water had taken most of it, he said so without apology and read what was still there, which was enough. The orc woman did not cry, but she breathed differently by the time he finished. "The name in the middle," she said. "It was Vora. That is my name. Then I'll write it in." Emmett said, "If you'd like a clean copy." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." He spent the better part of an hour with it, working from the damaged original beside a fresh sheet, reconstructing what could be confirmed and marking honestly what could only be inferred. When he handed her the copy, he handed her the original as well. She took both and held them together as her chest hurt for a moment before she tucked them carefully inside her coat. She paid him what he asked, and a little more, and she left before full dark. She came back the following week. This time, she did not have a letter to be read. She had words to be written, a reply, she said, to her father's surviving sister in the valley, who had not known he was ill until after. Emmett took out a clean sheet and sharpened a pen and listened. She talked haltingly at first, searching for the right shape, for things she had only thought in her own language, and Emmett wrote what she said and then read it back, and she would shake her head or nod, and sometimes she would find the right word on the 3rd try, and her expression when she found it was the expression of someone who has been carrying a stone for a long time and has just set it down. She came back the week after that. Then every 2 weeks through the winter, sometimes with a letter to be read, sometimes with words she needed shaped into sentences, sometimes simply to have a document witnessed and sealed. A land record, a boundary agreement, matters her clan's dealings had sent her to the valley to settle. Emmett learned over those weeks that her father had been the keeper of his clan's oaths, that the role was a serious one, that among her people it meant something like a notary, and something like a judge, and something like a priest, all braided together, that she had not expected to inherit it, and was still growing into the sizes of it. She learned in those same weeks that Emmett had been a schoolmaster's apprentice before he had been a scrivener, that he had a cat named Brindle, who slept on the correspondence shelf and had to be relocated every morning. that he kept two kinds of tea on the small iron stove in the corner and offered both without asking which she preferred, and that he remembered, from the second visit onward, that she had chosen the darker one. He never made a show of any of it. He did not announce his decency. He simply did the work as if it mattered, which was all she had ever asked of anyone. The winter was a long one. The town outside the shop remained cautious, not cruel, but watchful in the way of people who had decided that wariness was a reasonable position. When Vora walked from the road to Emmett's door, people found other directions to look. When she left, the conversation started up again behind her, and it was not always unkind, but it was always about her rather than for her. Emmett's shop did not participate in that economy. Inside his four walls, the work was the work, and the person bringing it was a person, and the words on the page meant what they said. In the first thaw of late winter, she arrived with a young orc boy who came up to her hip and clutched the edge of her coat with both hands. He had a letter folded inside a piece of cloth, already damp from the journey, written in orc script by his mother to her own mother in a village 3 valleys over. The boy had been told the letter said something good, Vora explained, but he did not know what, and his grandmother was old and might not be able to read it herself, and someone needed to make a copy in the common tongue that could be passed along. Emmett read it. He made the copy. He told the boy, in plain words, what his mother had written, that she was well, that the new house had a window that faced the morning, that she thought about him every day, and was saving a carved wooden bird to give him in the spring. The boy did not have enough coin for the copy. Emmett kept the original for the record and sent the boy out with the copy and his money. That afternoon, Vora looked at Emmett with a particular expression of someone who has been measuring a thing for a long time and has finally gotten the full measure of it. "I am going to send people to you," she said. "I would be glad of it," Emmett said. "They may not always have much coin. Then we will work out a fair arrangement each time," he said. "That is how this shop has always run." She nodded once. She paid for the boy's letter herself on the way out and did not mention it. Spring arrived, and then the visitors. An elder came with a boundary dispute that had been tangled for 2 seasons, and Emmett spent 3 mornings with the documents and wrote a clear summary that both parties signed. A young woman came with a contract for apprenticeship that she could not read in its original form, and Emmett went through it line by line at the small table, marking the parts that were standard and the one part that was not, and that she ought to ask about before she signed. A man came with letters from a son working the mines in the east, and sat in the wide chair and listened while Emmett read them, and left without speaking but came back the next week to have Emmett write a reply. By midsummer, the queue for Emmett's shop on Thursday mornings had grown long enough that he had to start keeping an appointment book, and Brindle had given up the correspondence shelf for the windowsill, and regarded everything with the philosophical detachment of a cat who has seen change before, the towns noticed. Towns always notice when a thing becomes different than it was. It noticed that Emmett's shop was, on Thursdays, a place where orc travelers and valley residents sat in the same waiting room, and sometimes, in the manner of people stuck in the same small space, spoke to each other. It noticed that nothing terrible had come of this. It went on about its business, and its business shifted in the small ways that towns shift, like river stones turning over. Emmett hired a girl from the school to help with copying 2 days a week. He ordered a larger stock of paper. Vora came in on the last Thursday of autumn, near to the anniversary of the first visit. She sat across from him in the wide chair, and she put a folded paper on the desk between them, but she did not ask him to read it. She set it there and rested her hand on top of it for a moment. "My father wrote this before he finished writing to me," she said. "He kept it sealed. My mother gave it to me after the harvest. She said he wrote it for whoever proved worthy of the clan's trust." She looked at Emmett across the desk. He had been watching for someone for 20 years. He never said who he thought it might be. Emmett looked at the letter. He looked at her. "You don't have to open it here," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." He read it aloud, as he had read her own letter the year before. At the pace the man had written it, without rushing, without smoothing. The letter was addressed to no one by name. It described a kind of person rather than a person. It said that the keeper of oaths needed, above all, someone who could be trusted to carry words without bending them, someone who understood that the space between two people was sometimes all a letter had to cross, and that crossing it honestly was its own form of faithfulness. When Emmett finished reading, the shop was quiet except for Brindle turning over on the windowsill. "He was describing the work," Vora said. "Yes," Emmett said. She picked up the letter and folded it carefully. She held it in both hands the way she had held the first one, the water-damaged one, the the one he had reconstructed line by line in the light of a single lamp on a cold afternoon that neither of them had known would matter. There is a word in my language, she said, for someone who keeps the word safe. Someone you trust with the things that cannot be replaced. She told him the word. He wrote it down without being asked, because that was the kind of man he was. My clan does not give it to outsiders. Emmett looked at what he had written. I will try to be worth it, he said. She smiled. Not the careful, measuring smile she had worn for most of a year, but the full one, the one that showed her tusks and crinkled the corners of her eyes and held nothing back. She stood up. She tucked her father's letter inside her coat next to the other one the way she always did. You already are, she said. That is why I am telling you the word. She left, and the door closed behind her, and the town outside was going on in its ordinary way, and Emmett sat at his desk for a long time in the quiet of a good day's work. Outside the window, nailed just beneath his own name on the painted board, was a second line, added in the autumn, at her suggestion, in both the common tongue and her own. Letters read, words kept, all people welcome. It was the best thing he had ever written, and he had not written it alone.